Good morning. Today we are starting section 4.2. Okay. And so on your table of contents, you need to put page 17, 4.2, evaluating algebraic expressions. Okay. All right, so let's turn over to page 17. And at the top, you're going to want to put 4.2, evaluating algebraic expressions. All right, so far we have talked about what an algebraic expression is, and we've talked about all the different parts of an algebraic expression and how to break up the terms and identify the coefficients and the constants. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is write an algebraic expression using exponents. Okay, so for the directions, what you need to write down is write each expression. And make sure you write these directions down so that way you will know when it asks you in your assignments, you'll know what it's asking you to do. So write each expression using exponents. And we discussed exponents in chapter 1. It was like the very first lesson that we covered. All right, so number 1. They want us to rewrite this expression d times d times d times d using exponents. Well, I remember from the very first, at the beginning of the year, that an exponent means you multiply it by itself that many times. So like 10 to the third power would mean 10 times 10 times 10. All right, well, let's count how many d gets multiplied by itself. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be to the fourth power. So you would rewrite that as d to the fourth power. So that means d times d times d times d, d to the fourth power. All right, number 2. 1 and 5/10 times h times h times h. Okay? Well, the 1 and 5/10 is not getting multiplied by itself or multiplied by anything else, so we would leave that like it is. However, h is being multiplied by itself 3 times. Okay? So the 1 and 5/10 we would leave alone, and h would be raised to the power of 3. Okay? So it'd be 1.5 or 1.5 or 1 and 5/10 times h to the third. Notice I didn't put a multiplication symbol in the middle. If you noticed yesterday and the day before when we were talking about terms, whenever you have a number times a variable, you don't have to put the multiplication sign in the middle. You just put them right next to each other, and we automatically know that it means to multiply. Okay. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, we're actually going to jump into the lesson, is evaluating algebraic expressions. Okay, so now we're going to get into the evaluating algebraic expressions. All right, and here's what an example would say. It would say the word evaluate, but now we're actually evaluating algebraic expressions. Okay. All right, so number 1, it would say in the directions, evaluate k plus 10 when k is 25 or is equal to 25. That's what it would say in the directions. Okay, so what this means is it wants k to be equal to 25. So if k is equal to 25, that means that I can substitute in 25 wherever there's a k. Okay, so my expression is k plus 10. And in place of this k, I would put the 25. So I would put 25 plus 10. And then I would simply simplify that. 25 plus 10 is 35. So whenever you evaluate an expression, you get one final answer, a number. Okay, so your answer should be a number. whenever you evaluate an algebraic expression. All right, let's try another example. Evaluate 4 times n when n is equal to 12. Okay, and just as a side note, whenever you have the product of 4 and n, you can write that several different ways. Okay, so for 4 times n, you could write that as 4n, or you could write that as 4 parentheses n. All of these mean to multiply, okay? And that's just as a side note. Okay? So anytime you see one of these, it means to multiply. Okay? So this is telling us to do 4 times n. Well, it says n is equal to 12, which means I can substitute in 12 for n. So instead of having 4 times n, I can have 4 times 12. Okay? And then 4 times 12 would be 48. All right, number 3. Evaluate d minus 17 when d equals 30. All right, so I start off with my d minus 17 and d equals 30, so I can substitute in 30 for d. So I'll do 30 minus 17, and 30 minus 17 is 13. All right, let's do one a little bit more complicated. This next one is we're going to still be evaluating algebraic expressions, but this time, instead of just having one variable, we're going to have 2 variables. Okay? So evaluate, and again, you need to make sure you're writing these directions down, so that way whenever you have these directions on an assignment, you will know what it's asking you to do. Evaluate n minus m when m equals 12 and n equals 30. Okay. All right, so we start off with our n minus m. And for n, we substitute in 30. Sorry, that should say m, not 3. For n, we substitute in 30 minus m, which is 12. So 30 minus 12, and 30 minus 12 is 18. All right, number 5. Evaluate a divided by b when a equals 16 and b equals 2/3. Okay. All right, so first we start with our algebraic expression, which is a divided by b. And then we substitute in. For a, we substitute in 16. And for b, we substitute in 2/3. Okay? Now, if you recall, dividing by a fraction, we covered this a couple chapters ago with our fractions chapter. You're going to want to do keep, change, flip. And you would keep the 16, change the division to a multiplication, and then flip the 2/3 to 3/2. And now you've got 2 fractions, okay? If you recall, to make the 16 a fraction, you just put it over 1, and then you do 16 times 3, which is 48, and 1 times 2 is 2. And then you reduce 48 over 2, and I can divide both of those by 2, and I get 24/1, or just simply 24. So we're adding some stuff that we did a couple chapters ago to the new material, okay? All right, and number 6, says evaluate P times Q when P equals 24 and Q equals 8. Okay. So start off with your algebraic expression, P times Q. P, and then substitute in 24 for P times 8 for Q. Okay. And then you do 24 times 8. Which is 192. Okay. All right, let's do one a little bit more complicated. Evaluate 3x minus 14 when x is 5. Okay, so this one's a little bit more complicated. You start out with your algebraic expression, 3x minus 14. Okay, and 3x, recall, means 3 times x. Okay, and then we want to substitute in 5 for x. So I could write that as 3 times 5 minus 14. Because remember, 3x means 3 times x. So you would do 3 times 5. And now you simplify. Remember, we do multiplication first. So 3 times 5 is 15. And 15 minus 14 is 1. All right, and number 8. Evaluate n squared plus 8.5 when n equals 2. I'm sorry, 8 and 5/10 or 8.5 when n equals 2. All right, so just like before, we start with our expression, n squared plus 8.5. And then we're going to substitute in 2 for n. So it's 2 squared plus 8.5. Now remember, squared means you multiply it by itself, so n times n. Well, n is 2, so you do 2 times 2, and 2 times 2 is 4. And 4 plus 8.5 would be 12.5, or 12.5, or 12 and 5/10. Okay. All right, that is section 4.2. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you, and y'all have a good day.